We all know the world is changing, and to some degree it's supposed to, right? After all, isn't that the definition of evolution? Well, I prefer to define evolution as a natural process of self-refinement, enhancement, or improvement of things, whether automated, subconscious, or a product of external influence, such as our immediate environment. I'm more prone to define the degradation, weakening, or worsening of something under the term devolution, which is what I'd apply to the current state of affairs we find ourselves in. Modern society seems to be getting dumber by the day, year after year, from one generation to the next, on so many counts, which I would also argue is, at least to some extent, totally by design. Have you noticed the same thing? Intellect, savvy, and pure common sense all seem to be going down the pan. I mean, most of us can barely cook for ourselves anymore, let alone grow the food we need to survive. Someone in a factory somewhere is able to magically fit entire digital dimensions inside our smartphones. But we barely know how anything works and could hardly knot the ropes it takes to build a boat anymore, let alone look after ourselves and defend our loved ones from life-threatening situations. Where's our sense of self-preservation and advancement gone? Most of us can hardly survive without electricity and light bulbs, with clean water pumped into our homes. Yet others are delusional enough to believe humanity is ready to colonize Mars. And the kicker is, this new level of sleepwalking ignorance isn't entirely self-inflicted. I believe it's due to something far worse, an intentional, nefarious force that has serious implications for civilization as we know it, a deliberate smokescreen being used to dumbfound us into mindlessly breeding a completely dependent flock of cattle with the collective inability to think for ourselves anymore. Critical thinking has been obliterated in favor of mass compliance in the form of a forced and sometimes forged consensus. We're so stuck inside a box that if we're not careful, we'll never be able to think outside of it again. Let me explain. Hundreds of years ago, some of our old boy legends, like Friedrich Nietzsche, were super clever. They saw this level of devolution coming. Nietzsche knew society would eventually screw itself up. He predicted we'd be living in a society that punishes deep thought and favors obedience over self-expression. A world in which truth is systematically replaced with fads and trends and disposable attitudes driven by stifled emotions and diluted reasoning. That's why some of us these days feel surrounded by noise and bombarded with disposable comments and irrelevant opinions, due to everyone around us conforming with the shallowness of a culture that strips our power in ways that deny us the use of common sense. Most people seem asleep, but some of us know better. We possess an innate ability to see the truth hidden between the cracks in ways that have the potential to wake us up. Having studied Nietzsche's words, I think I've got to the bottom of what he was saying. So by the end of this video, I'll explain my findings to you in plain English, so that my honest interpretation can help you understand why stupidity is spreading amongst us like a raging virus, and how modern life is actually encouraging it. This video will show you how Nietzsche predicted the rise of the widespread passive mediocrity I've identified, and break down why a lot of modern society now seems to fear true thinkers that go against the flow, more than crooks and criminals. I'm also going to try and teach you how to avoid being an integral part of the unfortunate masses, the sleeping herd that have no idea how stupid they are. Because if you continue to go along with their madness, you risk being swept into the very same wave of devolution that's dragging the world into the chaos we see happening around us. If you're unhappy contributing to a world in which the truth is deemed offensive, excellence is seen as arrogance, and material gain, false comforts, and power over others rule our lives, stick with me, because I can't wait to show you how Nietzsche not only diagnosed the disease he warned us about, thankfully he was brave enough to suggest a way out, a secret exit plan that most people's short attention span won't let them even listen to, let alone trust enough to act upon. Nietzsche's take on stupidity wasn't so much defined by low levels of intelligence, nothing to do with aptitude, test scores, or a master's degree. The stupidity Nietzsche had identified was a deep aversion or sinister refusal for so many of us to think for ourselves, due to an overpowering addiction to the illusory comforts of avoiding confrontation and avoiding uncomfortable truths. He recognized a generic tendency for the general populace to subconsciously surrender their will in favor of pursuing the easier option of joining the majority to contribute to a herd mentality, purely because the loneliness of thinking independently and rocking the boat could prove painful in ways that triggered feelings of non-acceptance and fear on levels that are somewhat akin to physical danger. The stupidity he addressed wasn't passive. It was more of an active betrayal of one's own potential that would result in moral failure, nurturing our refusal to grow and better ourselves. That's why so many people are shy nowadays, scared to express themselves for fear of upsetting the status quo. Many of us simply parrot slogans without understanding or believing them, and echo sentiments without genuinely meaning them. And this is also why, at the other end of the spectrum, those that do find the courage to speak up are often fueled by levels of outrage that replaces acceptance, debate, and nuance, turning them into faceless keyboard warriors who spend hours screaming and barking online with an ego-driven hunger to win arguments and make themselves right by insisting on having the final word, rather than seeking the truth. This is the rise of a culture that prefers obedience over understanding and safety over truth. Nietzsche called this the rise of the herd mentality, in which people reject reasonable enquiry and start repeating what the crowd says, even when they know deep down something isn't right. And to make things worse, herd mentality doesn't just force people to conform, it also makes them feel morally righteous for doing so. Nietzsche noticed how religion, nationalism, and early forms of mass media trained people to obey without questioning. And you have to admit, today's mainstream media mixed with the internet's online phenomenon of social media has turned the human herd into a literal hive mind. Why think critically when you can scan ultra-suggestive headlines to form instant opinions? Why entertain deep thoughts and philosophies when we can consume tweets like brain grains of cereal and thread posts like plates of mindless spaghetti? We've gone from seeking the truth to devouring viral propaganda. When Nietzsche said, "There are no facts, only interpretations," and he wasn't wrong, but that applies to us in our time of mass media and data consumption now, more than ever before, in our data-flooded, sensory-saturated landscape of instantaneous, omnipresent communication. Sadly, we've taken Nietzsche's words and blown them way out of proportion. We've twisted them into a gross version of our reality, using his observations as an excuse to believe almost anything we're fed, as long as it spikes our dopamine and makes us feel good, or shocks our lazy brain cells with enough sensationalism to make us feel alive. If we're not careful, we could find the thrill-seeking aspect of ourselves becoming our worst enemy by becoming so complacent about the real world that we'll eventually only believe ridiculous claims and false commentary. Have we become so complacent that we've started to create a truly perverse state of existence, where we're manifesting a permanent landscape confusion to ensure we're tickled by the titillation of damning headlines and obsessed with the trivial fancy of celebrity news, over and above truth and honesty? Joseph Goebbels was the Nazi propaganda minister who wrote about the power of large-scale lies, 1941, in an article that translates to From Churchill's Lie Factory, in which he rightly claimed that the bigger the lie, the more it will be believed. He described the principle of how a lie, persistently repeated enough, will eventually be accepted as the truth, the same concept which linked Adolf Hitler's articulation of the idea in his 1925 manifesto Mein Kampf, stating that the masses are more easily deceived by a large lie than a small one. So you see why those of influence and power cannot resist exploiting our propensity for stupidity, when such a level of self-inflicted laziness and complacency become the preferred state of the masses, for fear of going against the grain or asking questions that may ignite uncomfortable truths. If you think about it, this is brewing a recipe for disaster. If we replace wisdom with opinion and confuse visibility with virtue, we're basically building a moral landscape geared towards rewarding our stupidity. If we applaud people who conform perfectly and never challenge the narrative, just to fit them neatly into a tribe steered by the subtle lies of an overbearing condition of peer pressure and compliance, no one will ever grow the inclination, let alone the courage to ask why. Because the moment anyone does question the narrative or step outside the group to challenge their thinking, they'll be ostracized or punished. Not physically necessarily, but socially, psychologically. They'll be labeled as arrogant or gaslit into believing they're wrong, or being difficult on purpose, which the crowd considers dangerous. And that's the key to Nietzsche's idea. Stupidity isn't natural, it's engineered. People are coaxed, conditioned, and ultimately forced to be stupid by our very own culture. Our fear of solitude and rejection, social isolation teaches us from a young age to fear deep thought in favor of recognition. Going with the flow is safer, so it's quite natural for us to intellectualize the fact that questioning everything attracts the wrong sort of attention and leaves us feeling different. And once that fear takes hold, we choose to stop thinking altogether. We become part of the herd, to stay safe and remain accepted by the herd. And thus, slowly but surely, we become stupid. It becomes apparent to anyone in need of the security that crowd manipulation provides that the price of independent thought is too high. That is Nietzsche's definition of stupidity, and that is the trap society has set for us. The only question is, can you accept this truth and do something about it before it's too late? Nietzsche predicted exactly how this predicament would quite literally infect the masses. He saw the early signs of a shift that would later define modern culture, the death of the individual mind. In his writings, he introduced the concept of the last man, which he defined as a figure who rejects risk and avoids thought in over, to obtain a level of comfort identified as happiness. This last man would choose consumption over creation, acceptance and compliance over investigation and inquiry. He is in every way the product of a world that has given up on the greatness of independent thought and individuality. The type of man that Nietzsche feared more than any tyrant, because the last man doesn't need chains or threats to obey. He's lazy and subverted enough to opt for mediocrity by simply choosing the easy option. He's been conditioned to see ambition as dangerous, struggle as unnecessary, and any form of challenge as offensive. And here we are, facing the inevitable manifestations of Nietzsche's last man, which has evolved from the warnings he predicted into the default dynamic of today, our current way of life. The last man is everywhere, scrolling endlessly, repeating pain points, obsessed with comfort, and recoiling from any idea that harsher his buzz. Our modern democracy, mass media, government and education has finally reared its ugly head to become our lord and master, despite the well-meaning intentions behind it all. By its very nature, modern life has deflated the human soul and actively suppresses any spark of our individual spirit. Through the insistence of woke equality and the generic leveling of society, nothing is left to rise up and stand out. When every opinion is valid, truth becomes irrelevant. When comfort becomes the highest value, growth disappears. And that's exactly where we are. Schools teach us what to think, not how to think. We spend years memorizing stuff for tests instead of learning to question things. Then we graduate and realize we have no idea how to form our own opinions. Now we've got social media that literally rewards the dumbest, angriest takes because they get the most engagement. The algorithm doesn't care if you're right. It cares if you're loud. News has devolved into emotional manipulation designed to keep us glued to the screen. Everything's either breaking or shocking or this changes everything. But a celebrity's lunch choice has never changed everything and never will. We're always terrified of being wrong, so we just echo whatever our tribe is saying. Being liked matters more than being honest. And if someone disagrees with us, we cancel them. Nietzsche called this out perfectly. He said the easiest way to mess up young people is to teach them that people who think like them are better than people who think differently. And we've built an entire culture around that stupidity. I'm not saying everyone's dumb. Some people are pretty smart. I'm addressing the majority. And admittedly, we're the ones to blame. We've accepted systems that make critical thinking unnecessary. Why wrestle with complex ideas when you can just find an influencer who agrees with you? Why read books when you can watch TikToks? Why think for yourself when your political party has already done all the for you? The people who get famous now aren't the smartest or even the most deserving. They're usually the most agreeable. They tell us what we want to hear. They make us feel good about our existing beliefs. Actual critical thinkers are labeled problematic or toxic because they make people uncomfortable. And here's the thing that makes all this worse and so much more damaging in the long run. We actually celebrate this. We throw money at people who say nothing meaningful. We worship celebrities who just repeat popular opinions. We consume media that confirms our biases instead of challenging them. It's like we've created a world where being wrong is the worst possible thing, so nobody takes any risks. Nobody says anything interesting anymore, so in response, nobody grows. They don't have to. This is how technology, media, and politics have killed our sense of purpose. We don't believe in anything bigger than ourselves anymore. And when we don't have something meaningful to strive for, our brain just shuts off. Instead of seeking truth, we seek comfort. Instead of growing, we just consume. We let algorithms feed us content designed to keep us scrolling, not thinking. We've outsourced our opinions to tribes and movements and influencers because forming your own worldview is hard work. It's scary. You might be wrong. You might stand alone. This is the scary form of intellectual laziness we embrace, dressed up to the nines as wisdom. I'm not pretending I have all the answers. I don't even have most of the answers. So amidst this landscape of fake news and false identity, what can we do about it? A good place to start would be to try and pick one thing you believe on a daily basis and ask yourself why you believe it. Where did this idea come from? What evidence do you actually have? And what would the repercussions be if you were wrong? Get comfortable with being uncomfortable. Real thinking hurts sometimes. Truth doesn't always feel good. But I'd rather be uncomfortable and growing than cozy and stagnant. Build your own philosophies instead of just adopting someone else's worldview on a wholesale basis. The majority are not always right, so don't always accept what they're saying. Test their claims. Recalibrate your understanding of the truth. Play devil's advocate and ask pertinent questions. Try to figure out what you actually believe and why. Make no mistake, this process may get messy. Your conclusions may seem incomplete, but they'll be your conclusions. Remember what it feels like to make up your own mind. It is your mind after all, so make sure you're the one to fill it with the type of knowledge you can confidently rely upon, as a true reference point, as a reliable foundation. Once your confidence grows, you can pluck up the courage to seek out people who disagree with you, not to argue with them, but to try and understand opposing viewpoints. Give debate a chance. Some of the best conversations and exchanges in history have been between people brave enough to hold healthy, heated debates that give both sides a chance to express completely different ideas and opposing viewpoints. Read a few factual books. I'm not saying storytelling doesn't open minds, as we all know. Most good fiction contains some of the most profound truths worthy of forming the bedrock of any generation's psyche. But sometimes a good dose of long-form reference material really gets the old grey matter working. And who's to say some of those propagandist non-fiction isn't pure baloney? So question everything and don't take anything for granted. Investigate ideas that took someone years to develop, not minutes to post. Most people will never do this work. It's too hard. It's too uncomfortable. It's easier to just join a team and let them establish what appears to be the status quo. But how do you tell when it's merely the default option, the easiest choice of least resistance? Those of us who actually want to grow and think for ourselves can't expect society to change. We have to change ourselves first. Nietzsche had this idea about becoming who you really are, not who others expect you to be. But you can't do that if you never figure out who you really are in the first place. And you can't figure that out by scrolling through other people's thoughts all day. And hey, don't just take my word for it. Maybe I'm wrong about all of this. Maybe I'm just another person yelling into the void. But at least I'm yelling my own thoughts, not someone else's. So the truth of the matter is this. Like me, you're going to have to employ common sense. Use discernment and intuition. That's got to count for something, right? When sifting the wheat from the chaff. You can keep consuming other people's ideas and calling them your own. You can keep seeking comfort over truth. You can keep fitting in instead of standing out. Or you can do the hard work of actually thinking. You're cool. But if you choose the second option, don't expect it to be easy. Don't expect people to like it. Don't expect immediate results. Be prepared to be wrong at times and accept it. Expect to be lonely sometimes. Be brave enough to question everything, including yourself, but also expect to actually live instead of just existing. In a world full of people who've given up on thinking, that might be the most rebellious thing you can do. What do you choose? Clarity is what we need. Clarity plus truth equals power.